body is only towards the spike protein. And so what that does is it prevents, and so you get exposed to COVID, it prevents attachment of that virus into your cells. So the beauty is that you could still be exposed, but it will not cause you to become ill with it. And that is something that is much more effective than any of our other vaccines that we've had. You guys are probably familiar with the flu vaccine only being about 40 to 70% effective, because they're using actually last year's flu strains and they're kind of putting them together in a vaccine and giving it to you. There's different types of viruses that we use. We use live different types of virus vaccines that we use. We use live virus vaccines. We use attenuated virus vaccines. And what that means is some vaccines, like the MMR, we actually give you the virus. Yellow fever, we actually give you a low dose of the virus. But then there's other vaccines where we give a jetted portion of the virus, and we give that to you. So that's always generally giving you the virus, where in this case we're only giving you a small portion of one of the proteins for attachment, which is why it is much more efficacious, where you're getting into the 90 to 95% efficacy, and this is why you haven't had any real significant side effects yet. So I'm going to start off by first asking if there's any questions, if everybody understands that process, and then I have a few questions here which I can at least start off with, and then if you guys have more, you can find a way to ask those so that I can answer whatever fears anyone has about the vaccine.
So from this group, do we have any questions?
So one of my questions is, if you get the vaccine and you're exposed to COVID, you can still pass it along to someone that's
Does
not
have the
vaccinated,
vaccine.
right?
Yes, because what it is, as I was just saying, is that you only have the vaccine to the attachment of it. So you can get the virus, and you don't get sick from it, but the virus is still there and you can still pass it on, which is why you want to get as many people vaccinated as possible, because if that's the case and you're passing it on to somebody else who doesn't have it, then nobody can get sick in that whole area.
So, to clarify, so you're only protecting yourself with your vaccination?
Correct. But if everybody gets vaccinated, then what happens is there's no virus left in the community, and therefore you're protecting everybody else.
Right.
So on a one-to-one basis, you're protecting yourself, but on a community basis, you're protecting everybody else around you. Okay? And so I think one of the other questions that a lot of people have is the speed of the vaccine. How is it that it was done within, 11 months, we all of a sudden have a vaccine, where most viruses, it takes 4 to 6 years. Some viruses, we haven't even had a vaccine yet in 30, 40 years, such as HIV. The difference is how they did this vaccine. The vaccine development occurs in phases. There's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They did all the phases at the same time because they had the government's money, basically. Pfizer used their own money, but Moderna used the NIH money. And what they did was they basically, first of all, it's a lot easier to sequence just the mRNA from the spike protein as opposed to the entire virus, which is why that saves time. And then the other thing is that they were mass producing it while they were doing trials. So if you think about it, if it was just approved last week, doesn't it take a year or so just to produce all these, millions and millions of vials of vaccine? They started producing it back in March. And so they were prepared that if the vaccine trial failed, they were going to throw away millions and millions of dollars worth of vaccine. So that's how the speed came by. The science of it was relatively easier to do because it was just a small portion of it. And then they did a lot of the phases in succession, which is used. So this is not entirely new, it's just new for a vaccine. So the speed I'm not worried about either. I think that hopefully they'll be able to translate this platform of vaccine to some of the other vaccines that we have, like flu and yellow fever and some of the other ones, but I may be talking ahead of ourselves, but I'm hoping that we'll get better vaccines as we move forward.
So does the way this vaccine is made make it more likely that if you were to have this vaccination, you are less likely to catch any COVID or any spike?
So it's very particular. It's very particular to COVID-19.
Thank you.
So our question is, and I think another question that some people would have, I'm just throwing out questions that I've heard throughout, is that some people feel that if you have a antibody to the spike protein of the COVID 2019/2020 virus, when it mutates, will it mutate to a different spike protein? And nobody knows the answer to that. And the thought is that, one, it depends on how hardy the virus is. They've gotten, I think, some variants of the virus which are more infectious but less deadly. But more infectious means that the spike protein is there, they're attaching more, which probably the vaccine would still work for. In terms of longevity, I don't know if you're going to have to, like you said, if you have a new variant next year, if you have to repeat the vaccine next year, or if it's going to last 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Nobody knows that yet. Again, we only have trials for about 2 months. So I can only really tell you 2 months worth, but we know from other vaccines that there's really no true long-term side effects. The major long-term side effects are things like Guillain-Barré, and there hasn't been any Guillain-Barré in these trials.
Doctor, if you had the COVID-19 and you have the antibodies, you still need to take the vaccine?
So you would generally, the question, I don't know if anyone can hear these questions. The question is, if you had the virus, do you still need the vaccine? If you get the virus, you get an antibody, you produce your own antibodies, that antibody lasts for about 90 days. However, you are somewhat protected for 90 days. So I believe that the supplier is still allowing you to get the vaccine. I think that there are some places, I know I was talking to my brother-in-law who's in Florida, they're actually prioritizing the vaccine to healthcare workers who are naive. And then healthcare workers who are exposed within 90 days, who are antibody positive within 90 days, they're at the back of the list. So they're really kind of trying to get the naive individuals first, but still, if you have an antibody, you can still get the vaccine. In the actual trials, the Pfizer trials, there were 45,000 or 43,000 patients. There were a bunch in there that were that had antibody positive and that had gotten COVID previously as well, and there was no extra side effects for them or anything of that nature.
So doctor, one of the questions was, besides the explanation for the mRNA, what other component is in the vaccine?
That's it. There's the mRNA component, and then there's the liposomal. It's basically just a liposomal envelope, I guess. That's the delivery mechanism. It has nothing to do with the vaccine, which is why the Pfizer vaccine has to be stored at such a cold temperature, because that delivery mechanism has to be stored at a cold temperature. While Moderna's delivery mechanism does not have to be stored at a cold temperature. So that's the only real difference, is the actual liposomal coat that they have.
So there is no other existing vaccine, doctor, that is very similar to COVID vaccine?
No, there is not. This is the first of its kind. The way that I think that's where everyone's hesitancy is, because it's new. Again, the science is there. It shows that it works. It's very efficacious. It doesn't have a lot of side effects. The side effects that this vaccine has is the general side effects that you get from an injection. It does have slightly more of those side effects, though. There are some people who get more arm ache, swelling, pain, a little bit of fever, myalgia, muscle soreness, joint pains within the first 24, 48 hours. People take some Motrin Tylenol for it, and they get better. But the vaccine side effects are generally localized to where you get the injection. And those side effects are generally worse on the younger population and the second dose as opposed to the first dose. And the reason is the younger population actually has a better immune system than the elderly. The whole purpose of this, don't forget, is to give somebody the mRNA and have them produce the antibody. So when you produce an antibody to something, your body revs up, your lymph tissues, your bone marrow, everything else revs up because you're producing the antibody, and that's where the fever, the chills, the sweats, all those symptoms come from. And if you're younger, you have a more robust immune system, so you may have more of those side effects. If you're elderly, you may not have as robust a system, so your side effects might be less so than a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old.
So what if you have tendency towards autoimmune or any autoimmune type of syndromes?
Well, there's nothing to suggest that that would actually correlate, and then you would actually have an exacerbation of your autoimmune syndrome. I mean, such as lupus or, you know, colitis or anything of that nature. There's nothing to suggest that that would actually exacerbate your symptoms. And I don't think there's anything that shows that you actually get any worse. And again, your whole purpose is to rev up your immune system, and the problem is with these autoimmune systems that the immune system is already revved up. And so again, you're going to have similar symptoms, right? And it's going to be transient. It's going to only be 24, 48 hours. So you'll have those similar symptoms, and they should dissipate within 48 hours.
They spoke about people being who have allergies or other allergies. Those were some of the cases that had some kind of more severe reaction.
Yeah. So
there was one case I think that did not have any allergies.
yeah. So there's a few cases. There was two in the UK. There's two that just were in Alaska as well. The two in the UK were two healthcare workers who were in the front of the line who had an EpiPen for other reasons. So they had a significant allergy to penicillin or something else for which they had an EpiPen, and they developed hives from the vaccine. The two in Alaska, one in Alaska actually had listed as allergies, but did not have an EpiPen. And another one had no allergies whatsoever. But we know is anything that we give you, anybody can be allergic to. You know, I could give you, you know, you can all have no allergies now, and I can give you penicillin, and you know, there's a 1% chance that somebody will have a penicillin allergy here, and that's how you find it. So that one person who had no allergy ended up with hives, and the other one also same thing, some sort of anaphylactic reaction. The one in Alaska actually had to be in the ICU only for a day. Getting steroids, epinephrine, and antihistamines, and then they were home after that. So that's 4 I know of out of all the people, you know, 45 in the trial and everybody who's gotten it this week so far. And so if you think about it, 4 out of, let's say, 100, 200, 300,000 is a good percentage. It's a good percentage chance that you guys will be okay.
So if you know that you are allergic to penicillin or clindamycin or so, should you be careful? Should you still go for it, or?
So again, those are only 4, right? And we know that there are plenty of people who've gotten it that have allergies to different things. Okay, so you know what they're doing when you get the vaccine, and I'm not sure if they actually have a protocol yet here. But what they're going to end up doing is they're going to have you take the vaccine, and you're going to have to sit and wait for 15 to 20 minutes there. Some of the places are dispensing, you know, Benadryl and some steroids and whatnot at the facility that you're getting it, so that if anything happens, you're there for 15, 20 minutes. If you have a reaction to it, you'll get treated immediately. It's not that you just get a shot and leave. That's why you will be observed for this vaccine.
And someone who's allergic to a flu vaccine, like who's not allowed to take because of egg allergies.
Yeah, that's different.
So
The question was, what about if you're allergic to the flu vaccine because of egg allergies and whatnot? As we were saying before, so the way that this vaccine is made, also the way that the flu vaccine is made, is actually some of the vaccines are grown in egg culture, which is an egg media, which is why an egg allergy is an issue. There's no issue with that here. There's no egg components. There's nothing of that we would have to be worried with. Again, allergy in general. They listed it because it happened, I think, the first few cases in the UK. Since then, there's been 2 in Alaska. But you in any medicine that you give, you're going to start having, you know, you're going to have a couple of cases here and there when that happens. I'm not trying to minimize it, but I just want to put it in perspective of what you're dealing with. You're dealing with hundreds of thousands, millions of doses, and then you just have a handful of cases. It's not significant enough for me to say to be overly concerned about. But because it is brand new, they are going to have everything available in case anybody develops any sort of a reaction. And then again, if you get the vaccine and something doesn't feel right, let somebody know right away, because if somebody does develop a hives or rash, we want to know it. The sooner the better, so that we can treat you.
Dr. Fauci said that even if you get the vaccine, you still have to wear the mask out in public?
Correct.
Or still after, why?
Correct, that has to do with the whole issue of everybody getting the vaccine, right? So the vaccine is gonna be rolled out in phases. Obviously, everybody here is in phase 1, right? We're all part of the healthcare system, we all get vaccinated first, which means that you can still go to the supermarket and other people have not gotten vaccinated. And don't forget, I just said you still can shed virus, right? So the mask is really for the person next to you so that you don't shed virus to them. So really what you're trying to do is wait till everybody gets vaccinated. Not only everyone gets vaccinated, but then you see the rates of the virus in the community drop. And you see the rates of the virus in the community drop, then you have at least a 70 to 80% vaccination rate in your community. Hopefully, don't mark my words, hopefully we'll be able to get rid of the mask by the end of 2021. Yes?
So 2 vaccinated people in a room alone would be okay without masks, yes? Or no? I'm not trying to complicate this, trying to understand. I have a mother with dementia who I would like to be able to visit. She'll be vaccinated in another facility.
So the question was
My
if
mask confuses her.
the question was if there's 2 people that are vaccinated and the only 2 people in the room, then they will not need to wear a mask. I think that would be okay. Okay. I think that if you're vaccinated, again, so the vaccination, don't forget it's a 2-shot series. So you're going to get the first dose on day 0, and then the second dose for the Pfizer vaccine is in 3 weeks. It's at day 21. The second dose for the Moderna vaccine is in 28 days, 4 weeks. So you have to wait for that second dose, and then after that second dose, you have to wait a few weeks afterwards so you make the antibodies. So you're really looking at maybe 2 months later, when 2 people have been vaccinated alone in the room. I think that would be okay. If you get your first shot and then go see your mother, then I don't think that's the time to take off the mask.
Doctor, there's a lot of concern in social media about infertility
Yes.
because of the vaccine. Clarify.
So there's a group of what we call anti-vaxxers who have a lot of theoretical concerns about the vaccine, yet nothing has been proven, right? It's a 2-month trial. How do you know if someone's infertile in 2 months, right? And so the concern was the spike protein. There are spike protein on the placenta. And so the concern was, if you're creating an antibody to a spike protein, is that going to be an antibody to the placenta? And this has really been debunked because there's not enough. The placenta is not just all spike protein, so it's not just one big pile of spike protein. So there's a small amount, but it's not enough to cause anything, to cause infertility or anything of that nature. And I told my friends or whatnot in the childbearing age, I told them that it's not a concern. There's no evidence that you're going to have any sort of reaction to the placenta, because first of all, placenta, you don't really have a placenta yet, regardless. If I give it to my daughter, let's say, there's no placenta there yet, regardless. And so that, I think, has been, I don't think that's valid. I don't think that's valid at all. So a few other questions that I have here. One was the Bell's palsy. There's 4 cases of Bell's palsy that I know of. There were simple cases of Bell's palsy that did resolve afterwards. If you have a history of Bell's palsy, should you get the vaccine? The mechanism of why the vaccine caused some neurologic compromise is still uncertain. And the reason why somebody had Bell's palsy could be Lyme disease or something else of that nature, so they may not be related at all. So if you have a history of Bell's palsy, I wouldn't be worried about getting the vaccine. It's almost the same issue in terms of autoimmune diseases. It's probably an autoimmune Bell's palsy that you initially had, and they're concerned about giving this to autoimmune diseases. I don't think that'll be a concern. Again, it was only 4 cases that I know of in the hundreds of thousands of cases that hundreds of thousands of doses that we've already given. So I wouldn't be worried about that. And so the next question was, if you get the vaccine today and tomorrow you develop fever, how will you know if it's vaccine related or if it's symptoms of COVID? So the most important thing is the vaccine will not cause a false positive COVID test. So you can anticipate that once you get the vaccine, there is a good percentage, as I said, 70 to 80% will get arm pain, myalgias, fatigue, a little bit of a fever that night. So you can expect that. If that continues 24, 48, 72 hours later, then you can still get the COVID test to find out if you truly have COVID or if it's just an extended vaccine effect. So it does not give you a false positive COVID test. So if you're concerned, a week later you still have the symptoms, then you should get a COVID test at that time.
Doctor, so how do we approach it here with our staff? So if, for example, we have employees getting the vaccine and then we have those kind of symptoms, because we're just like kind of iffy whether we want this employee to continue working or not.
Well, I think for most of the, like the hospitals and most of the other places, what they're doing is, you have that entry questionnaire. They're just changing the questionnaire to saying, have you had any fever within the past 24 hours and have not received the vaccine, or something of that nature, where it would tell you that, well, you got the vaccine, that's why I have the fever for 24 hours. Some people would say, well, let's vaccinate them on a Friday so that they have Saturday off, something of that nature, and you can stagger some people. Not everybody has weekends off, so if somebody has a Tuesday or a Wednesday off, maybe you can get vaccinated the day before. So you can try to stagger that based upon, you can ask your supervisor when the vaccines come in and then when you want to get vaccinated. They should have a plan in terms of doing that. But yeah, you can anticipate that. But again, if you get the vaccine and you have a fever, I'm not overly concerned that, again, everybody in this room would think that it's related to the vaccine. So I think it just has to be noted on the questionnaire when people walk into the facility.
How about pregnant women, doctor? Are they safe to get the vaccine?
Again, they did not do any trials on pregnant women. The American College of Obstetricians has actually recommended that it is okay to get the vaccine, but they say just to discuss it with your doctor. There's nothing to suggest, again, same thing with the placenta, right? There's nothing to suggest that you can't get the vaccine. Again, this will be rolled out in phases. So, there are, some pregnant individuals who will not be getting it until phase 3 anyway, and by then they may have delivered. And so you kind of have to see where you're going to be falling in the spectrum of when do you get the vaccine. If you're already third trimester, then you can wait, 4 weeks and then get it after you deliver. I think that's reasonable. If you're first trimester, then, then you can talk about it and say, well, what is my risk? Do I work in a facility where there's COVID all the time, or am I on a Zoom call at home for, my IT job somewhere? That's when you can say, well, maybe I'll wait for pregnancy to be over, versus if you're working here, maybe I'll get it while I'm pregnant. It's worse to get COVID while you're pregnant than to get the vaccine while you're pregnant, just to be clear. And I think that's the one thing you want to keep in mind with any vaccine, is you want to understand the risk-benefit ratio. The risk of you getting COVID is so high that the risk of the vaccine is minimal, right? Because, everything, the neurologic effects of the disease, the long-term effects of the disease, everything, those things we already know about, right? We know that is not something that people want to go through. I still see people in my office who had COVID in March, who have subsequent issues that they're still dealing with. Some people have brain fog, some people have, there's just things that we don't know about that the virus actually does. So I just look at it in the sense that the disease is much worse than the vaccine.
So going back to the spike proteins on the placenta, does that indicate that the COVID vaccine is not specific to the spike proteins from COVID?
No, they are, but the spike proteins from COVID are similar to other spike proteins as well.
So it's worried that it can.
Yeah, it's the old theory of Lyme disease, right? In order to diagnose Lyme disease, you have to have 10 bands, right? 5 out of 10 bands. Well, why 5 out of 10? Because one band may be on Lyme disease, but it may also be on HIV. One may be on Lyme disease, may also be on lupus. And so one band could be anything, right? So the more bands that you have, the more likely it is that one disease. So it's the same concept with this. They may have a couple of cross-reactive, bands here and there with the placenta or not, but to have them all is really going to be COVID. So you may have a little bit here and a little bit there, but that's not enough to negate what's happening in the placenta because of what you're doing with the virus. Other questions, can it be given to a patient who has shingles? If you have an active disease, I'd probably, people say when you come in and you have a fever and you have chills, should I get the flu shot? I generally say wait a week, wait till your illness is over, and then get the vaccine at that time. The reason being is that if you do get that fever or something happens, you want to know that it's the actual vaccine that's causing the fever and not shingles getting worse or something else that's causing this fever. So I always say, just if there's something that you know that there's a finite time limit to that is going to be done in a week or two, finish that up and then get the vaccine afterwards. And then the last one says here, is it safe for people who are on Eliquis? Eliquis is a blood thinner that it's been used for AFib and for DVTs and whatnot and other reasons for blood thinners. As for any blood thinner, you're getting an injection, so then you're probably a little bit more likely to bleed with the injection, but it's nothing significant. A little bit of oozing pressure will solve that, but there's nothing to do with the vaccine.
We'll just check, doctor, if there's any questions.
All right, if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat or wave your hand. Okay. All right, Ronnie, you want to unmute? Hold on 1 second. All right, you can ask your question.
Okay, thank you. I was curious how many people in the elderly age group were in any of the clinical trials.
I don't have the exact number, but there's quite a few. They actually did the trials on a lot of the elderly. The most interesting part of the trial, I don't know if you're familiar with the FDA advisory board for the vaccines that they held for Pfizer last week. It got approval 17-4, and the 4 people who had said no were not because of the elderly, they were because of the age 16 and 17-year-olds. That was the issue. Those were the people that were not in the trial as much, and that was the concern, and that's why people had said no, because they thought that the indication should have been 18 and up as opposed to 16 and up. So the elderly was actually represented quite well in these trials. It was the young, it was the 16 and 17-year-olds that were not as well represented. But we all know that there's not really that much of a difference between a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old. They all have a robust immune system and they should do well with the vaccine.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anybody else have a question? Just wave your hand. I think that is it for right now. Doctor, I have one question. Will you be taking your vaccine on camera for everyone to see?
I can do it. I'm scheduled at 10:15 Saturday morning at Princeton Hospital to get it. So if you want to bring a camera, you're more than welcome to.
All right.
Doctor, we have a few minutes left. Most of the sentiments that we hear from the staff is that, no, I'm not taking the vaccine, I'm not putting anything in my body. Can you give them a last few spiel to convince them to take the vaccine? Yeah, so one is, first and foremost, this is not a mandatory vaccine, and I want to make that clear, okay? It is probably one of the better vaccines that you'll encounter in your lifetime, okay? It is probably the most studied vaccine. I mean, if you really think about it, how many patients do you think the flu shot gets studied on before you get it, right? Compared to this one that was 45,000 people. Most trials have, the whole hydroxychloroquine trial was 11 patients, right? That's how they did that trial, and that's how it was so crazy. This is 45,000 people, okay? Influenza, when they do this, they don't even do trials anymore because of the way they do it. So you're getting a different vaccine every year, but you don't really get it tried in other individuals before you get it. And so to say something that I don't want to get this in my body or I don't want to take this, I totally understand that. But you can't, the reason can't be because you don't know what's going to happen, all right? Because we know extensively what this vaccine will do and how it will work and how it protects people. And for any vaccine, right? the whole purpose of the vaccine is to prevent everybody here from getting the disease. And I don't know, everyone, again, I just want to put this in perspective. Myself, being non-Caucasian, am at a higher risk to die than other people, okay? And we know that, African American, Asian, Indian, Filipino, Hispanic are higher risk to die than other people. Okay, and I'm just looking at the faces in this room, okay? And I can tell you that when you guys get COVID, it will be different than what you see on the news. It'll just be different, okay? And I can tell you from what I see in the ICU at Princeton, from what I see in the hospital at Princeton, right? That's what we see. We see different ethnicities in the hospital. So the risk, I believe, now I don't have a lot of proof for this, but the risk is greater for you guys. It just is. And so I see no reason why not to get this vaccine, and I truly don't see any reason not to get it. Especially, what we also know is that I've seen families get decimated from this. I mean, there was a family in Freehold here with five individuals in the family died, right? And so then you're gonna come here, you're gonna work, you're gonna get the disease, and maybe you'll be fine, but then you go home to your family, right? And you may have a mother or a father or somebody else in the household, and something else happens. And so there's more of a ripple effect on this. It's not as simple as, it's not a simple disease that is not transmitted. This is highly contagious. It's highly contagious and it's highly lethal. So I just want everyone to take that to heart. Now again, it's not mandatory. You can make your own decisions, but just make sure they're educated decisions. Okay, just don't make it a political decision. Make it an educated decision. Okay.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Before we end, Linda will just take the group.
Sorry, I was far away, but I'm coming.
Thank you, doctor.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I'm saying goodbye. Thank you all so much for joining us. Please know that if you have more questions, we can get them to Dr. Bhalla and get an answer for you through email, or if there's something you really want to know, please ask. Please don't make a decision based on what you see on the internet. Please make a decision based on the people that we trust here in the building to have our best interests in heart. There's nothing to be gained here except your good health. Thank you, Dr. Bhalla.
Absolutely. If there's any questions, anybody's thinking about not getting the vaccine and they have more questions and need me to clarify, I'll be happy to clarify for anybody.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.
Thank you, doctor.